Let's bring in two guests. Timothy Snyder, he's the professor of history at Yale University. His latest book analyzes what he calls America's turn towards authoritarianism under Donald Trump. And in Washington, D.C., the writer and political analyst strategist, Cornell Belcher. Welcome to you both. Cornell, you're in Washington. I bet you'd rather be on the street here than wherever you are right now. Sum up what's going on. Put this into some kind of context.
It's a sigh of relief. I think our system isn't perfect, but it still works. Our democracy may stumble a little bit, but it's still working. Look, I think it was poetic that shortly after some more votes came in from Philadelphia, one of the major urban areas of this country that Donald Trump has time and time again insulted, that it was safe for the networks to call the election because he didn't have a pathway in Pennsylvania, and that puts him over the top. But it is also a historic day on a couple of different levels. One, it is, look, we had more engagement in this election than probably ever in our country, I think. And then we're going to have 65, maybe 66% of eligible voters vote in this election, which we have not had since before women had the right to vote in this country. So Americans were very engaged. And in the end, the majority has spoken. And regardless of what Donald Trump tries to do in the courts are not going to overturn the will of the people. And you also had Senator Harris cracking a glass ceiling. So there's a lot of young women who are going to be looking at this over the next couple of days and thinking, I too can be vice president, perhaps president of the United States.
Okay, Timothy Snyder, how worrying is it? How perplexing for the whole country is it that Donald Trump is not conceding? In fact, if anything, he's doubling down. He's saying that he's been cheated out of his rightful election victory. And he tweeted it, I think, from the golf course. Is that a problem for this country?
Yeah, I'm afraid that in addition to all the good and joyous historical parts of this election that Mr. Belcher has cited, we're also going to face another kind of historical fact, which is that we're not going to see a concession speech, I'm afraid. And we're going to be reminded that our democratic system depends not only on procedures and laws, but it depends upon norms. And one of those norms is that you recognize when you've been defeated and you gracefully pass on your responsibilities to the next person. I'm afraid that Mr. Trump isn't going to be fulfilling that particular responsibility as others before him have done. And I think what we're going to see now in the days to come is a fight. I agree that it's not a fight he's very likely to win. What I worry about more is that the last memory of this administration is going to be this conspiracy theory that the election was somehow stolen from him. And I think it's unfair to his supporters and unfair to the country, really, to leave them with that idea that somehow something went wrong and that somehow the process didn't work. And I worry about the consequences for the country. My second worry is what Mr. Trump himself will do, because if his idea is not to concede and to claim that this was stolen, then we have to ask what follows from that. Where does a man go who leaves the presidency in that kind of disgrace? Where does a man go who has huge political debts, huge financial debts, and also faces criminal charges? What happens next? I think he might do something which would surprise a lot of people, like, for example, leaving the country.
Okay, so you're saying he might actually take flight, as it were, get on a plane, on one of his planes and leave?
If we were not looking at the United States of America, if we were Americans looking at a third country and saying, look, here's a guy with huge debts, here's a guy with talent he's willing to sell to foreign bidders. Here's a guy who's facing criminal prosecution. Here's a guy who has no virtues but does have skills. We would probably nod our heads and say, yeah, this is somebody who's a flight risk. And I think it's important to overcome our American exceptionalism and look at this man for what he is. I don't want to predict what he's going to do, but I think he's certainly a flight risk. I mean, he's raised the possibility himself. He told a cheering crowd that if he lost, he might have to leave the country.
Well, he's not accused of any crimes so far, so he might just get on a plane and go on a long golf vacation. Who knows? Cornell Belcher, can I ask you? He's going to be in the White House for another 76 days. That is the transition period. One of the quirks of American democracy. He will still be commander-in-chief. He will still have that button. Does that worry you at all, that he will be in that position of power, but not necessarily with a mandate?
I think it should worry us all. But at the same time, look, the system is not perfect, but I think there's enough checks and balances in the system to try to rein him in. But it is not a good thing, because he's shown a willingness to flaunt, the law and not follow norms, as we've just talked about. But I hope and I pray that there are, especially people in the Pentagon, who are going to be a check and a balance on any sort of disastrous or crazy behavior that we might see from this president in the following days.
Is it pictures of, right, okay. And Cornell, tell me, I mean, these things only really work if the two teams work well with each other. In other words, if the Trump team works with the Biden team and helps them set up the machinery of government for the next administration. I mean, is that something that is now pie in the sky?
Well, I don't think any of us think that's going to happen. I don't think any of us, heck, as we just talked about, we don't think he's going to even concede. So no, I don't think you're going to see any cooperation from the Trump administration like you've seen, the Bush administration give to the guy who I work for Obama, and what you saw Obama try to do for Trump. I think all those norms are out the window with this presidency.
Okay, let's go back to Timothy Snyder. Timothy Snyder, you mentioned the president's alleged crimes there. Just flesh that out a little bit. And what is the kind of thing that he can expect after he leaves office? And also talk about his debts a little bit.
Well, he's under investigation by both the city of New York and the state of New York for various kinds of bank and tax fraud. You're right to say that he's not yet accused of any crime, but these are serious investigations and are regarded as such. He owes a good deal of money. He owes more than $400 million to Deutsche Bank, most of which is personally guaranteed. He's got almost $1 billion of other debt, which is coming due in the next 3 or 4 years. He's under investigation from our Treasury, the IRS, to the tune of $100 million. It's not clear that he actually has the money to pay that debt. So it makes him very vulnerable personally as well as politically. I mean, what this adds up to, again, if you take the American exceptionalism away, if you're looking at a person who's facing criminal charges and you're looking at a person who owes a lot of money, that person is a flight risk, just objectively. And going back to something Mr. Belcher has said, I think that the people who hold positions of responsibility in the Pentagon and elsewhere are aware that this is an unusual set of weeks to come. And I think they've probably been thinking about that for a rather long time.
So to sum up what you said is really that, the best way for him to stay out of either the poorhouse or indeed potentially jail was to stay in that house, and that is no longer an option. Timothy Snyder, Cornell Belcher, thank you very much indeed.